Two from Galilee. A love story by Marjorie Holmes.
In our last reading, we were in the middle of chapter 17 of this edited version of the book Two from Galilee, and Mary and Joseph had been turned away at the inn. Once they reached Bethlehem, Mary was in great pain, almost ready to have the baby. The innkeeper finally came up with an idea: send them back to the cave, which was a manger where the animals lived. Outside of the cave were some travelers who had made a fire and were eating. So Mary and Joseph didn't have much peace and quiet, and yet they're getting ready now for Mary to have the baby in Bethlehem on this final episode of Marjorie Holmes' book, Two from Galilee. Joseph turned to Mary and held out his arms. "I'm sorry, my dearest," he muttered as she slid down off the donkey. "It's the best I can do." "Thank God," she said softly. "Joseph, thank God for it and for you." She leaned against him, her forehead cold with sweat. Then in a little gasping steps she moved toward the place where at last she could lie down. "You must go and fetch a midwife," she said. "It may be hours before the baby comes, but I must have a woman by my side." "Yes, I should have thought of that before," he said. "I should have inquired about it at the inn." Again he was shocked at his appalling ineptitude. "Fool," he thought. Now you'd have to go leave her, and this time when she was in such pain. "Don't worry, it'll be all right." Mary touched his stricken face. "The pain has stopped altogether," she said, surprised. "Perhaps I can sleep a little now." "I'll not be long, I promise. I'll find someone. Now sleep, my darling. It's been such a terrible day for you. Sleep and rest." Leaving the lamp behind, he set forth, feeling his way frantically along the stalls. "Idiot, blunderer," he thought. "A stable among oxen and donkeys, not even a woman with her. All this warning, and I didn't have the wits to ask about a midwife." Suddenly he halted when he heard, "Joseph!" Frozen, he heard it again, "Joseph!" He ran back quickly. She was sitting upright, her legs dangling over the stall, gnawing her fists, the tears streaming down her face. "Joseph, don't go. Don't leave me. Joseph, it's unbearable. I can't stand it." "Oh, Mary." He cradled her in his arms, crooning to her and rocking her until the hideous convulsions ceased. "Oh, God," he thought. "You, God. If you are a God who performed this miracle, why are you doing this to my beloved?" Suddenly she whispered to him, "I'm sorry. I got so frightened when it began again and I was so alone." She pushed back her tangled hair. "What will we do? Joseph, what will we do? You know the ancient taboo. It's not fitting for a man to gaze upon a woman in childbirth." "Yes," he agreed. "And even if it were not so, I know nothing of what to do to help you, my beloved." "Well, go fetch some water," she said. "Some hot water if you can get it. We'll need it. Go to those herdsmen at the door and see if they can give us some. But please don't be long. Go no further even to fetch a midwife." "I know, I'll send one of them for a midwife. That's it." But even as he ran, he heard her moaning, and knew that the cruel thing that tore at her body to bring forth this young one was stretching forth its claws again. The herdsmen who were strumming their lutes or sprawled about drinking wine reared up as he burst into the circle of light. "Help me," he said. "Have you any hot water left from your meal? Please, in heaven's name, help us. My wife is far gone in childbirth, and she needs water and a midwife." One of them got up and said, "My friend, the water we can share with you, but there are no midwives among us." There was laughter, but it stopped as they saw Joseph's face. Another man rose, tall and dignified in his striped robes, and lifted a steaming pot from the coals. Here's some barley soup. It's nourishing and still hot. Perhaps it will be of some comfort to your wife. Here, I'll carry it for you and light your way. Meanwhile," he turned to the others, "Joab, rise. Go to Bethlehem and see if you can find a midwife." The smothered cries from within the little cubicle halted both of them. "Thank you, my friend," Joseph said. "We've got to get back quickly." To the others, Joseph said, "If we need anything further, we'll call." The man let Joseph go back in alone. He went back quickly, stood there while she lay writhing. He had known that women suffered, had heard his own mother on nights when the younger ones were born. But this was Mary, his Mary, and the thing that tortured her clawed into the dark pit of his own bowels, even though it was not his child that she struggled to bring forth. He finally reached her. "Would to God that your mother could be with you." The heat of his words caused her to lift her head. They regarded each other, facing the truth. He said again, "I wish some woman could be with you, but I can't leave you, Mary. If the midwife doesn't come, well, I'm but a man, without a knowledge of these things." "Don't be afraid," she gripped his hand. "We're forgetting something, Joseph. This is God's child. God will not abandon us. Weak and human as we are, God has chosen us to be his servants. Surely he will help us through it." God's child, Joseph thought. Mary was right. Ignorant and inexperienced though they were, God would not fail them. God would let nothing happen to his own child, nor to her who delivered it. "I must think," Mary said. "While I'm still clear-headed, I must instruct you. Now you must build a fire, and keep the swaddling clothes warm, and the water hot. There must be warm water for bathing the baby. And let me think, and a knife. You must dip it in very hot water before cutting the cord." "A knife?" Joseph gasped. "Yes, it must be done, Joseph. You must do all this if the midwife isn't here. And the cord must be tied securely with dried gut. I put a piece together with the knife in a little parcel, just in case the birth should occur somewhere unexpectedly. And the salt for rubbing the child, it's with it there in the package." Joseph's head was beginning to whirl. These things, these human, physical things, would it come to that, actually? Despite all else, her swollen body, and now the pangs of labor, even though it seemed to him blindly, somewhere within his being, beyond even the area of thought, that this which had begun as a miracle would conclude as a miracle. Not so much to spare them, Mary, her suffering, or him, his incredible tasks, but simply because God's Son must come forth in a manner more fitting than to be hurled from a woman's bloody flanks. "Joseph! Joseph, help me!" she cried. Joseph ran to her. "It's all right. It's all right, Mary." The pain had begun. Suffering. A tremendous excitement filled her along with the agony. There was some secret here. If she were not so weary, she'd understand it. The secret of suffering. Truly, to know the Lord, you must suffer. "Joseph! Oh, Joseph!" She obeyed, gratefully. There was a great ripping and flooding and burning, and the boy-child came forth out of her, out of Mary, his mother. Thus, in blood and pain, he came into the world, this Son of God, who is also man and Son of man. And Joseph lifted him up for her to see, and they looked upon him together, and marveled at him, his wholeness, infinitely small, and red, and perfectly formed. And when he squirmed in Joseph's arms and uttered his first cry, the thrill of all mankind ran through both of them, for this was life, human life, and they knew that a miracle had been achieved. Chapter 18. Mary lay drowsing, with the child in her arms. Joseph had cleansed it and rubbed it with salt as she directed. When it came to swaddling it, however, he carried the clothes to Mary. It was she who placed the newborn cornerwise in the square of linen and folded it up over his tiny sides and feet. Then, with Joseph's help, she made its little harness of swaddling bands to bind it so that its limbs would grow straight and strong. So now she lay drowsing while Joseph busied himself at tidying up the small nest that had become a space for their home. How beautiful it was! He had taken the bloody straw from beneath her and replaced it with clean, sweet hay. He had bathed her, too, and brought fresh garments for her. He had brushed her matted hair, and then he had brought the swaddled child for her to feed. Ecstasy flooded her, the ecstasy of the new mother who finds herself with the child safely cradled in her arms after a long ordeal. The only reality is this wonder, this sense of harmony and love, so intense it's scarcely to be endured, and the tears escape the eyelids and roll foolishly down the cheeks. And so Mary rested on this night that her child was born, and Joseph kept watch, near exhaustion himself, but too excited to sleep. There was a little of the barley soup left, and he realized that he too was ravenous. He heated it over the coals, and sitting on the dirt floor, drained the cup. It was delicious after his long fast and the struggle to help his beloved. New strength began to flow through him, and with it an exultation that bordered on Mary's. He need berate himself no longer. He had not failed her. Her son had been safely born, and he had helped to bring him forth. So that made him, in a new and wondrous sense, his son too. They were sleeping there, quietly now, his wife and child, his little family. And, unable to restrain himself, he shielded the lamp and held it above their faces, if only to witness the blessed sight of it in this moment of his rapture. As he stood there, he was startled to hear a low rumble of voices, the sound of approaching feet. Fear gripped him, a passion of protectiveness like a lion before its den. He went to bar the door. No harm should come to them. None should even disturb their peaceful sleep. He could see figures carrying torches, though behind them, through the mouth of the cave, such light streamed that it seemed the sun was already high in the skies, or that the herdsmen must have rekindled their great fire. To his relief, he saw that the man who led the group was the one who had earlier given him aid and some soup. "Hush," Joseph said to the man. "You must be quiet. Don't wake them. My wife and newborn son are sleeping." "Then all is well with you, my friend?" the herdsman asked softly. His long, narrow face seemed paled in the glow of the light. His eyes were filled with doubt and amazement. The child has been safely born?" "Well, yes, thanks be to God. A man-child is even now resting with his mother. We must be quiet." "Then it's true." There was a smothered outcry, a stir of excitement. The others pressed forward. Among them were several shepherds who had not been with the group in the yard, men who had come a long way. "We told you this is the place," one of them said. "The star led us to it. We followed it all night to this very stable, and it stands even now above the door." He begged Joseph, "If you're the father, pray let us come in, if only for a minute, that we may see with our own eyes the glory that the angels told us would be waiting in this holy place." Joseph couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Angels?" "Yes, a whole chorus of angels," the man said. "As we were tending our sheep in the Jericho hills, this lad saw them first." He thrust the boy forward, and to Joseph's astonishment the child fell on his face. "He thought at first he was dreaming, then the rest of us awoke from the music and the light." "We traveled for hours," another pleaded. "Please let us come in, if only long enough to deliver the gifts that we've brought." And Joseph saw that indeed each one carried something in his arms. "Joseph," Mary said, "what is it?" Joseph had never seen such a star, flaming, now purple, now white, now gold. Its light illuminated the countryside. Dazed, he told Mary, "I'm afraid there will be others coming to see the child." "Let them come," she murmured. "Let them come." For 40 days the rude little stable was their home, and each night the great star stood over its entrance. Joseph had never seen such a star, flaming, now purple, now white, now gold. Its light illuminated the countryside. Dazed, he told Mary, "I'm afraid there will be others coming to see the child." "Let them come," she murmured. "Oh, Joseph, isn't he lovely? Just look at him. See, his eyes are open. He knows us. He's trying to smile." "Foolish," Joseph laughed. "All babies smile like that. They don't know what they're doing." "Oh, but this one does," Mary said. "Our baby does." Their baby. Joseph bent over where she stood, unwinding the swaddling bands. They could hear the voices of people coming and going in the courtyard. Music and laughter and raucous shouting floated down from the inn. Camels brayed, harnesses clanked, and there was the thumping of baggage. All made a kind of music for the strange, lovely, half-waking dream. And sometimes it was interrupted by the coming of visitors, as Joseph had predicted, for the shepherds had spread the tidings, and some who came were only curious or skeptical, but some who came, like the shepherds, marveled and went away rejoicing. One night, before they were ready to leave and go home, Joseph stood by the stable door. He had been to the well for water, but he could not go in just yet. The night was cold and clear. It was exhilarating and yet peaceful to stand for a moment before joining his loved ones inside. From this little distance he stood savoring it, the sweet communion of the stable. Taking up the cool, bulging skins, he was about to go in when he heard the pluck of approaching hooves and the jingle of harness, and saw, flowing slowly down the pathway from the inn, 3 camels. He paused, curiously repelled and attracted by the serpentine necks and heads festooned with tassels, the arrogant grace of them as they moved, and the commanding elegance of their riders. Rich merchants, evidently, dark princes from some far country. And it flashed through his consciousness that it was strange that they had not summoned a servant to stable their mounts instead of themselves riding down from the inn. Joseph turned hastily, not wishing to be seen, and was about to duck into the cave when one of them called out to him, "Wait, you there in the doorway." The camel drew nearer. "Tell me, is this the place where the newborn child lies?" Joseph stood rigid, silent in the grip of a terrible apprehension. The second rider said, "Of course it is. It has to be. See, the star no longer moves." The third rider drew abreast. "But a stable? Surely this is no fit birthplace for a king." Joseph's heart had begun to beat in heavy strokes. Obviously these were men of travel and learning, men on a vital mission, and Joseph was afraid. A great foreboding arose within him, and a fierce rebellion. Why did such men want to see his child? Were the dreaded, momentous things hinted at so darkly in the prophets already to begin? He would not have it. Not yet. The child was not ready. His life had only begun. He stood blocking the doorway as the strangers prepared to dismount, wrapping the growling beasts on the neck so they folded their thin legs to crouch. Joseph demanded to know, "Why do you ask? What do you want?" "To see him. Is there not a newborn child within?" Joseph hesitated. "Only my wife and my son." The tall one said, "The stars have foretold this event for years. We have studied the stars. We are magi from Persia and Chaldea, philosophers and physicians. We've traveled for weeks following the star that stands over this doorway. It's become the sole purpose for our existence, my friend, to see him, the newborn King of the Jews." The voice was grave, at once stern and imploring. "Surely you would not turn us away." Joseph gazed into the stranger's impassioned eyes, and he knew that it was ended. The peaceful dream of the stable with the child as only a child at its center and heart, for cradled there in the clay manger lay the man of destiny, the Christ child. In a few moments Mary could hear the pound of sandals and the swish of robes as they approached. It was like the ominous rush and pound of some majestic but overpowering sea. They filled the room. They knelt down before her. They laughed gently and pulled out gifts. "For the King," they said, rising steadily and brushing at their eyes. "For the hope of the ages, and for you, his blessed mother." One of them draped a cashmere shawl about Mary's slight shoulders. "And you, his father." A leather bag of coins was pressed into Joseph's hand. "Use it to lighten your load, for it's a heavy load that you've been elected to carry, and a long journey that you'll surely have to make." "How so?" Joseph asked. "Tell us, you who are wise, what lies ahead for the child and for us?" The men exchanged troubled glances. The tall Persian spoke. "For one thing, make haste to leave this place. You did well to question us. There are those in the land who would come not to worship, but to destroy this king." Joseph said, "You mean Herod?" "Yes, Herod, the madman. Foolishly, we stopped in Jerusalem to inquire where the child might be found. Even so-called wise men can make mistakes." He smiled faintly. "Herod seemed unduly interested in this king we sought. He made us promise that when we found him we'd return and tell him." "Don't worry. We'll return to our country another way. But the news will spread. There'll be others who will send the information to him. So take the child and go. Don't stay here another day." Joseph said, "But we're leaving for Jerusalem tomorrow. We must present the child at the temple, for the day of my wife's purification is at hand. Whatever the danger involved, that must be done." The Chaldean physician spoke up. "Go then. Many infants are brought to the temple every day. It's the last place Herod would think to look for them. But whatever else you do, don't return to Bethlehem." It was night now, deep night, and all was still. Now and then a dog barked somewhere, a hoof stomped, a swallow went fluttering across the ceiling. Except for these sounds, the stable was silent. Yet Mary could not sleep. Careful not to disturb Joseph, she got up and stole about, doing last-minute things for their journey. Then she crept back and gazed upon the face of the slumbering child. It lay so still. Was it breathing? She bent her ear to the hot bundle. She could feel it move inside its cocoon of wrappings, the lips make sucking movements, and her own being relaxed. "Mary?" She turned, startled to see Joseph sitting up in his pallet on the floor. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, dear, I was only looking after the baby." He flung off the robe and began striding about, poking the fire, turning the wick of the lamp higher. "I can't sleep either," he said. "At least I didn't think I was sleeping, but I must have been, because I had a dream just now, a vivid dream. An angel stood beside me and repeated the wise men's warning." He was breathing hard. "Mary, the men were right. We have to flee. After the presentation tomorrow, we can't come back here. We can't even go home to Nazareth. The dream made it very clear. We must take the child and flee to Egypt." "Egypt?" Mary said. "Yes, the land of our people's exile. We'll have to wait there until it's safe to come back. The angel told me." Mary stared at him as he heated the milk to calm himself. "Joseph, are you sure?" Sure? He could scarcely steady the vessel, he was so shaken. Who was sure of anything anymore? All was a dream. All was a miracle. To be born at all, to love and be fulfilled, or to love and be denied. Where was home? A house he had built on a Nazareth hillside, or a crowded stable, or an everlasting highway? Did man ever really wake and know truly where he was at any given moment, or if he had lived and breathed it all, or only dreamed his own existence? For all was a mystery. Where it began, no one knew, and if it ever ended, even at the grave, no one else could say. But he did believe. "Yes," he said grimly, and sipped the milk from the gourd. "Yes, we must do as we are told, Mary." Sorrowing, he saw that this was the only truth now. Forces beyond themselves had brought them to this moment, and would surely guide and guard them in the hours that lay ahead. Joseph turned and looked a moment at the manger. "This is our cross, Mary, yours and mine. To know that our son's hour will come, and we can't stop it. To live with that certainty every day of our lives. But this is our blessing," he told her, "to know that in his living and in his dying, he'll be lifting the yoke somewhat for all men. Life with its burdens will be more tolerable because of him. There will be hope, not only for the freedom of Israel, our own people, but for all people who are enslaved. And hope for the tormented spirit, Mary, to have some link, some proof that the God we worship really cares about us, not to have to fight God anymore, not to have to be estranged from him." Joseph's face was working. He was struggling to make it clear to her. That too is suffering, perhaps the worst suffering of all. Somehow, though, this child, it will bring it all about. But he's so young," Mary said. "He's so little and young." "Yes, he's just a baby now, our baby, unaware of this great plan." His voice broke. It was a second before he could go on. Pray God that he will be a long time knowing. But when he becomes a man and takes up the work that's been designed for him to do, we too must be ready, Mary. And we must accept it now. We must not struggle against that secret knowledge. We must accept it and grow in courage toward that hour, so that we won't be found wanting, Mary. Mary, his mother. Mary, my wife. Joseph lifted her chin and gazed into her stricken face. Outside, a cock crowed, signaling the coming day. The darkness was lifting, the room emerging from the shadows. Through the chink above them, a pink glow began to bloom, and it seemed to Joseph that he knew now why it had been his fate to love Mary, perhaps with a greater love than man had ever been asked to give a wife. For that love was akin to the love personified in his child. Sacrifice. God so loved the world that he would give up his own son, and that son, that poor doomed son, he too would love the people in it so much that he would be willing to give up his own life. To suffer that others may live, as Mary had suffered at birth, to deny oneself for those who are dearer to us than life, that is the true union of those who love. And that in the end was what would bring man back to be united with his God. I love you, Mary, Joseph said. This child is truly a child of love, sent to us because we love each other so much, and the home that we'll make for him will be one of love. Remember how you once told me that? Our love will help us, my darling. It'll enable us to grow together in courage and strength, so that we will be worthy of this great blessing that's come to us in this stable of Bethlehem, worthy of having him entrusted to us, even for a little while. Mary nodded, though her eyes were wet, bending her head. She kissed Joseph's rough hand. Then she arose and set about to get the morning meal, for it was daylight now, and they had a long, long journey ahead of them.